Good morning and welcome to today's virtual conference on investigations of fatal officer shootings, hosted by the Civilian Oversight Commission. I am Danielle Butler Vappie, the Interim Executive Director for the Commission. Today, we're discussing what happens after a deputy shoots and kills a civilian. We have an educated panel of speakers lined up to explain the process and answer your questions on process. You'll hear from Teran, who is an LA County District Attorney's Director of Prosecution Support Operations. Next is the Office of Inspector General's Chief Deputy Dara Williams. Then you'll hear from Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau Lieutenant Patricia Thomas and Chief Medical Examiner Odey Ukpo. Our moderator will be Vice Chair Jamon Hicks. We invite your feedback on our conferences, and you can respond to the survey at the end of this session or email us at cocnotify.lacounty.gov. I'd also like to highlight that we have one vacant community appointee position available. If you or someone you know would be interested and available to serve on the commission, please visit our website to review the bulletin and application. And now I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Hicks.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you again to the community for joining us today. My name is Jamon Hicks, and I serve as the Vice Chair for the Commission with the Civilian Oversight Commission. I am also a partner at Douglas Hicks Law here in Los Angeles. My civil litigation involves both civil rights and wrongful death cases, catastrophic personal injury, and also police misconduct cases. This is a topic that is very special to me and a topic that is very important for all the community to hear and discuss. Over the years, there have been frequent fatal officer shootings in Los Angeles County. In our commission meetings, we often hear from the public about these instances. When these incidents happen, the community is left wondering, are the officers charged with a crime, disciplined by the department, or simply sent back out to patrol? Today's conference brings together experts to explore investigation protocols, conflicts of interest, and also community transparency. The panelists will highlight concerns about holding officers accountable and discuss the obstacles of enforcing, disciplining, or charging officers with a crime. We hope to learn more about the investigations following a fatal officer shooting, the roles various departments play in the process, and some reasons that officers are often not charged with the crime. As the Commission continues to evaluate the policies, practices, and procedures of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, we welcome continued community feedback. After the speakers have provided their expertise, there will be an opportunity for the community to ask questions. So now let's turn it over to today's speakers. Although we've told you the names and titles of the panel speakers, I invite each of you to introduce yourself, including your preferred pronouns, and a little bit about your background if you wish. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Teran, who is with the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Director of Prosecution Support Operations. Please go ahead, Diana.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. Before I talk about our protocols and our process in the DA's office, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on me. I started with the DA's office in December of 1988. I was here for about 10 years. And then left the office and represented criminal indigent individuals on appeal. I did that for about 10 years, and then in 2010, I first got involved with oversight of law enforcement with the Office of Independent Review, and we conducted oversight of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. So in that capacity, I rolled out, I was on call once every 5 weeks for an entire week, 24/7. I rolled out to officer-involved shootings. I reviewed internal investigations, uses of force. And also recommended policies and revisions to policies as a result of some of the investigations that I reviewed. In 2014, I became the Sheriff's Department's first constitutional policing advisor, where I reported directly to the sheriff and continued this work of oversight of responding to officer-involved shootings, but then at the time I was the only constitutional policing advisor, so I responded only to fatal unarmed shootings, continued to monitor criminal misconduct as well as policy violations and provide advice to the sheriff and other executives in the department. When Sheriff Villanueva took office in December of 2018, I left and was briefly for about 6 months with the Office of Inspector General. And then thereafter, I was the first law enforcement accountability advisor for the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office. And then when DA Gascon came into office, he asked me to join his team. And in my current capacity as a director of prosecution support operations, I supervise the division that reviews officer-involved shootings, and that is our Justice System Integrity Division. So I will, if we can go to the next slide. Actually, let's skip this one. I'll talk a little bit about misconduct, but I'll focus today as comments on our protocols. We have what's called our DART team, and it's a team of one deputy DA and one investigator that's on call 24/7, all year long, and they respond to officer-involved shootings as well as in custody deaths, where there is any possibility that there was a use of force that contributed to the death. Up until July of 2021, we responded to all shootings. However, in July of 2021, the AG has started responding to the fatal shootings of unarmed persons. We do not respond to shootings where no one was injured as a result of the shooting. And that protocol, I believe, has been in place for at least a couple of decades that I'm aware of, and maybe beyond that. Additionally, if a law enforcement agency requests that we roll out, we do roll out. And what the process is we have a command center where we have DA investigators that are on call, that are working basically 24/7, and they receive calls from the agency when a shooting has occurred. At that point in time, then our DART team is notified and rolls out to the shooting. We can go to, and I think I indicated on there that we average about 6 rollouts a month. Next slide. And I will say, we respond to officer-involved shootings throughout the county for all agencies, not just for the Sheriff's Department. As I indicated earlier, we get notified, we have a team roll out. That team stays there and is briefed. They also conduct a walkthrough of the scene, and they are also present during any witness interviews, and they are free to ask questions and interact with the investigators at that time. Thereafter, within 24 to 48 hours usually, there's a briefing given to supervisors at the chain of command. And how it works is we've got the DA and the DA investigator that brief their head deputy, and then they brief me, the chief of staff, and the DA right away. And if there are any concerns at that point, we're advised about them. Next, the autopsy, if it's a fatal shooting, the DA investigator attends the autopsy. On occasion, a DA will also attend the autopsy. Thereafter, we basically just wait until we get the investigation from the agency. And it can take anywhere between, I would say, 6 months and 2 years for that investigation to be complete and be presented to us. So prior to that time, we don't have a whole lot of involvement in the investigation. Once we do get the investigation, then if we believe it's complete and thorough, we review it and render a decision as to whether or not we think there's sufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that any crimes were committed. If not, we issue a recommended memo that explains our rationale as to why we don't believe we can file a case. If we don't feel the investigation is complete, we will ask the agency to conduct additional investigation. We might conduct additional investigation ourselves, or we might impanel an investigative grand jury. One thing you should know about investigative grand juries is that anytime we do that, it's completely confidential and secret. We're not allowed to comment on it, confirm or deny that one was impaneled, unless and until there's any sort of an indictment or filing on the case. But sometimes that does happen. It's not common, but it does happen. So basically, once the deputy DA that reviews the investigation finishes reviewing, they make a recommendation, they author a memo that then goes up their chain of command, again to their head deputy, then to me, to the chief of staff, and to the DA. And then in that process, the memo can be sent back with questions, with requests for further investigation. Any number of things can happen, which that's in part what takes a long time to get these memos out. And then after there's a final decision, the next step is to notify, in all fatal shootings, the next of kin and or their attorneys. And that also often takes a little bit of time to schedule. And as a result of those meetings, sometimes we postpone finalizing the memo if additional information is presented, or they raise concerns that we need to look into. But then once it's final, we issue our closing memo and we post it on our website. So, and the website's listed on there. We can go on to the next one. So we post also our in custody death memos. And I've just listed on this slide the number of memos we've posted. In 2021, there were 39 OIS memos and 4 in custody death memos. In 2022, 71 and 8, and in 2023 through May, there are 29 and 1. And anybody can access those. They have some minor redactions, but for the most part, all the information and our rationale is contained in there. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is a graph. I thought it might be interesting for everyone. It's not just officer-involved shootings. This is a list of cases, as well as we can gather, that we've filed under this current administration since 2021. And it's a total of 79 criminal cases against 84 officers. And one thing of note is that prior to this administration, there had been, I think, 2 officer-involved shooting cases that had been filed in the prior 2 decades. From what we could research, there was one in 2020, and there was one filed under the Garcetti administration. There were no officer-involved shooting cases filed under the Cooley administration, and there was one officer-involved shooting case filed under the Jackie Lacey administration. Since DA Gascon has been in office, this administration has filed 6 officer-involved or deputy-involved shootings. And I've listed on there 2 out of Torrance, 2 out of the Sheriff's Department, 1 from Whittier, and 1 officer from Long Beach Unified Police Department. Next. I guess that's it, unless anybody else has any questions. I don't know if we'll take them now or at the end.
Okay, well, thank you, Diana. We appreciate that presentation. Next, we'll hear from Los Angeles County Inspector General's Chief Deputy Dara Williams. Please go ahead, Dara.
Good morning. As everyone mentioned, my name is Dara Williams, and I'm the Chief Deputy at OIG. Prior to joining OIG in 2019, I was a Deputy District Attorney for 25 years and prosecuted cases with the District Attorney's Office. At the Office of Inspector General, we also respond to both fatal uses of force and also any deputy-involved shooting in the field and in custody deaths. We have two rollout teams. One rollout team focuses on in-custody deaths, which are what we consider to be deaths in jail facilities. And then the other team would roll out to any deputy-involved shooting. And then there sometimes are deaths in the field where the person is actually in custody. So those are referred to as in-custody deaths. But when they occur in the field, then are what we call our field rollout team that responds to deputy-involved shootings roll to those. We do not attend any of the witness interviews for any of these shootings. The DA's office is able to, but we're not. We do not participate in any investigation. We are prohibited from obstructing an investigation, but we could be involved in the investigative process if invited in by either the District Attorney's Office or the Sheriff's Department. And there would be ways that we could do some limited investigation without obstructing an investigation, but because of our ordinance and state law, we don't tend to do that unless we're asked. If you could go to the next slide. I'm going to concentrate here on Sheriff's Department investigations since we're Sheriff's Oversight. One important thing to know is that most other law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles County conduct concurrent criminal and administrative investigations into law enforcement officers' fatal uses of force. However, the Sheriff's Department conducts consecutive criminal and administrative investigations of all uses of deadly force by deputies in which a person is killed or seriously injured. It's only after the DA's office has issued a decision on the filing, whether filing criminal charges or declining to file criminal charges, that the IAB, Internal Affairs Bureau, investigate the case administratively. So even deputy witnesses who did not use force are not interviewed by the Internal Affairs Bureau until after the district attorney's decision. And you just heard that the district attorney's decision can sometimes come years after an incident, and we all know that memories tend to fade over time. The Internal Affairs Bureau is not prohibited from interviewing deputies or other witnesses who are not the subject of a criminal investigation relating to the incident while the criminal investigation is ongoing. So this means that there could be concurrent investigations, and I'll talk about those limitations with the next slide. So the Sheriff's Department has opposed conducting concurrent or consolidated investigation, and their reasoning is largely based on a settlement agreement and then a subsequent appellate court decision in a case known as Gates-Johnson. Gates-Johnson, there were two officers, deputies, Gates and Johnson, who were accused of excessive force, and they sued the department because the department tried to compel their statement during the tried to administratively compel their statement during the criminal investigation. The criminal team cannot compel a statement because of the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. However, the administrative team can compel a statement. They just can't give that compelled statement to the criminal investigators. In the Sheriff's Department, it's the Homicide Bureau that conducts the criminal investigation for deputy-involved shootings. So the Gates-Johnson settlement agreement provided that the department would not require a deputy subject to concurrent criminal and administrative investigations arising out of the same incident to submit to an administrative interrogation. So that means that IAB would not compel that deputy to give a statement until it was determined that criminal charges would either not be filed, or the deputy was arraigned on the criminal charge, or the deputy requested a continuance on the criminal charge. Next slide, please. There was an appellate court decision that's unpublished that found that nothing in the Gates-Johnson agreement prevents the Sheriff's Department from conducting an administrative investigation, including interviewing witnesses and obtaining a voluntary statement from the involved deputy during the course of the criminal investigation. So there could be concurrent investigations. The only limitation is the timing of the compelled administrative statement of the deputy who is the subject of the criminal investigation, or his, anybody who was involved in a way where they essentially asserted their Fifth Amendment rights in the criminal investigation. That's what's covered by the settlement agreement. So the deputies could give voluntary statements in an administrative investigation if they chose to, but they cannot be compelled to. But nothing about Gates-Johnson prevents concurrent investigations. As I mentioned earlier, why is this important? Because the witnesses, the people directly involved in the shooting, oftentimes won't give any statement at all until, I shouldn't say at all, they could at the scene give an abbreviated statement if they so choose. But they don't have to. And so that means that the people involved in the shooting do not have to give a statement oftentimes until 2 years or in excess of 2 years from when the incident occurred. Next slide, please. This just makes the point of what I already said, is that if in fact the deputy was compelled to give a statement, that statement can't be used in the criminal investigation. So it's important just to note that even if that statement were given, it can't be used in the criminal investigation. And there are other agencies who, as I said, do it concurrently. They're not bound by this Gates-Johnson settlement agreement. So other agencies can actually compel that statement in the administrative proceeding, but that statement cannot be provided to the criminal team. And in fact, in the large Los Angeles Police Department Rampart investigation, because there were many criminal investigations arising out of that, there were 2 different teams that would interview officers, and one team was not able to access any of the compelled statements in deciding the criminal charges. Next slide, please. Some other concerns that the Office of Inspector General has with regard to the investigations and also the reviews that follow these, ultimately the administrative investigation. And I would suggest that or refer you to our last quarterly report, because in that case, we talk about a shooting death that resulted in a district attorney filing, and the deputy was found not guilty. And then what happened in the administrative review of that filing, and that person is still with the department. I think what's important is not necessarily the outcome, but if you read our quarterly report, the analysis of that shooting. And so, and we've seen this in cases with regard to district attorney office decisions, where oftentimes the district attorney's office states in their declination that certain things weren't addressed in the criminal investigation, and so they can't consider that in making their decision. And the point is that neither the Homicide Bureau's criminal investigation nor the IAB investigation necessarily focus on public policy issues or the constitutionality of the underlying tactics, or, for instance, whether the person is involved or thought to be associated with an alleged deputy gang. And when that happens, when that evidence isn't collected, then that can have an impact on what the sheriff's department does in the future. If a lawsuit's not filed, then the sort of what we call corrective action in the sense of adopting different policies, revising current policies, things that are designed to prevent reoccurrences and build public trust. If that evidence isn't collected, then that evidence may be forever lost. And as I just mentioned at the outset of this, often there is a failure to adequately analyze the events leading up to the shooting, which is actually required by law. And so it's important that not only that these investigations be done in a way that we access all of the evidence, including the statements of the deputies who were involved at an earlier point in the proceedings, but it's also important that the criminal and the administrative investigation take a broader view of things in doing their investigation, and that then the review panels, which there's an executive force review panel, that they also take a broader view in their analysis of what led up to the shooting. Next slide, please. Our recommendations are that the Sheriff's Department should conduct concurrent investigations by the Homicide Bureau criminally and IAB administratively, that the Sheriff's Department executive staff should consult with County Counsel for advice on the practical application of the Gates-Johnson settlement agreement in order to expedite the administrative investigations by IAB, that the Sheriff's Department should renegotiate the Gates-Johnson settlement agreement because it is in fact a settlement agreement. And if they negotiated with the unions, they could not have to abide by that settlement agreement. There was no end date put on the settlement agreement, but by the same token, there's nothing preventing the department and the county from renegotiating the Gates-Johnson settlement agreement. And then that, as part of that negotiation, it would be that the Sheriff's Department could conduct concurrent investigations and compel statements with regard to the administrative investigation only. And then that the IAB investigation at a minimum should include investigating the constitutionality of the underlying tactics related to not only the force, but to the totality of the circumstances that led to the use of force. Thank you.
Thank you, Dara. Now you'll hear from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's Homicide Bureau Lieutenant Patricia Thomas.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on this subject. Next slide, please. This is a 4-year comparison of the total number of fatal deputy-involved shooting investigations from 2020 to 2023, including involved stations and bureaus in the first box, statistics in the second, and investigation conclusions in the third. The letters of opinion refer to the DA's office conclusionary findings. To date, we have received 14 letters of opinion for the 2020 investigations, and 3 letters of opinion for the 2021 investigations. Criminal charges were filed on 1 deputy involved in one of the deputy involved shootings. Next slide, please. Upon Homicide Bureau desk personnel being advised of a fatal deputy involved shooting, an investigator from the office responds to the designated command post to act as a liaison until the handling investigators arrive on scene. The standard Homicide Bureau response to a deputy involved shooting consists of a lieutenant and 4 investigators. Between the Homicide Bureau desk, Sheriff's Information Bureau, and Internal Affairs Bureau, notifications are made to the following units who will respond to the command post: Body-worn camera unit, Risk Management Bureau, Training Bureau, Scientific Services Bureau, the DA's office, Office of the Inspector General, Department executives, and Medical Examiner Coroner. Investigators will gather as much information as possible prior to arriving on scene to ascertain whether more than 4 investigators and what potential resources are needed. Some of the things they consider are how many shooters, how many witnesses, whether the scene is indoor or outdoor, and the magnitude, and whether there are multiple scenes. Prior to the homicide investigators' arrival, the scene should be secured and remain intact and unaltered as much as possible. A major incident log will document all who enter the scene, the reason, and when they left. The involved deputy should have been transported to the nearest station and accompanied by a supervisor to ensure the circumstances of the incident are not discussed and will remain in their uniform or clothing they were wearing at the time of the incident. Once all investigators are on scene, they are briefed, assume control of the crime scene, and have the responsibility of conducting a thorough and impartial investigation. Once a homicide lieutenant has gathered preliminary facts of the deputy-involved shooting, she will brief all stakeholders on the preliminary information gathered and escort them through the scene. The homicide team lieutenant will issue a media statement as well as updates regarding the circumstances surrounding the deputy-involved shooting without compromising the integrity of the investigation to make the communities we serve and the public aware. Next slide, please. The handling investigators will delegate and coordinate duties such as processing the scene, checking the area for surveillance cameras and witnesses, assisting with interviews of witnesses, utilizing detectives and crime analysts, coordinating with the body-worn camera unit, high-tech task force, and the coroner investigator responding. Once the investigators have a good grasp on the scene and what may have occurred, investigators will interview the involved employees in the presence of their attorneys. The involved employees will be photographed by crime lab personnel in uniform or the clothing they were wearing at the time of the incident. This includes their duty gear and weapon used. Their weapons will be recovered by homicide investigators and crime lab personnel and transported to the crime lab for examination. Internal Affairs Bureau will also be present during this process. Investigators will interview all civilian witnesses. Representatives from the DA's office and the Internal Affairs Bureau will be involved during this process. Investigators will also interview law enforcement witnesses, and representatives from the Internal Affairs will be involved in that process. All interviews are recorded. Handling investigators will return to the scene and get updated by assisting investigators with any new details that may have been uncovered. Investigators will ensure they obtain reports from all who assisted. They will attend an autopsy to ascertain injuries, preliminary findings, and recover any potential ballistic evidence located within the decedent's remains. Representatives from the DA's office and the Office of the Inspector General will also attend. The Office of the Inspector General has also provided a copy of the homicide book after the DA office receives it. Once the investigation is complete, investigators will assemble a homicide book. The approved homicide book, recorded interviews, and all evidence is presented to the DA's office. The DA's office will evaluate and determine whether the shooting was legally justified or in violation of the law. Investigators will conduct follow-up investigation if requested by the DA's office, and they will monitor and attend any court proceedings that may follow. A summary of the facts surrounding the deputy-involved shooting is posted on the Sheriff's Department Transparency webpage, as well as a critical incident video. The critical incident review panel will perform a preliminary risk management of the deputy-involved shooting 7 to 21 days after the incident. Critical incident reviews are privileged and confidential. Participants are limited to department executives and specific personnel from Professional Standards Division, the Concern Division, Special Operations Division, Detective Division, Training Bureau, Office of the Inspector General, and County Council. The homicide lieutenant presents an overview of the deputy-involved shooting. The panel makes the recommendations to the concerned division chief and concerned assistant sheriff. The panel has an authority to direct temporary restriction and or reassignment of involved personnel. Additionally, once the DA's office has provided their letter of opinion, the Internal Affairs Bureau Force Shooting Response Team will conduct an administrative investigation and present their findings to members of the Executive Force Review Committee. Next slide, please. Thank you. We have multiple investigator vacancies. Additional personnel would help make investigators' workload more manageable and would eliminate time delays in work submission. It would also help with fatigue and overall health. The Bureau has older high mileage vehicles, outdated and a shortage of laptops. We don't have hotspots for internet capability or advanced technology to map and scan crime scenes. Updated equipment would be helpful. Reliable vehicles, they could write reports, search warrants, and other documents at the scene, and advanced technologies such as the Leica Map 360 or unmanned aerial vehicles would expedite the time it takes to process a scene. The amount of time required for the DA's office to render an opinion in the legality of the shooting and the medical examiner coroner office to produce their autopsy reports are also obstacles. If investigators receive these reports in a timelier manner, that would improve our completion time of these investigations. We have a great relationship, working relationship with both agencies, and the turnaround is starting to pick up. In addition to speaking on a regular basis, the Homicide Bureau and the DA's office, specifically JSID, will be scheduling quarterly meetings to discuss ongoing cases. Next slide, please. Homicide investigators collaborate with all the agencies you see on the screen. The DA's office, as a DA, and I covered throughout this presentation, the medical examiner coroner, the Office of the Inspector General, involved law enforcement agencies, the Department of Justice, as well as the Department of Mental Health. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Patricia. Now you'll hear from the Los Angeles County's Chief Medical Examiner, Odey Ukpo. Please go ahead, sir.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to discuss on this important topic. I'm just going to give an overview of what we do in our office regarding any sort of officer-involved related shooting. My name is Dr. Odey Ukpo. I'm a physician. I'm the Chief Medical Examiner of the County of Los Angeles Medical Examiner's Office. I'd like to note that we are no longer have the coroner in our name as of official this week, and so now we are the Medical Examiner's Office. The Medical Examiner's Office, one of our missions is to alert and notify the public and stakeholders of causes of sudden and unexpected death in order to prevent premature death. And when it's involved with officer-involved shootings, the stakeholders that are invited to attend the autopsy include law enforcement, also the DA's office, and also the Office of the Inspector General. Only those that are directly involved with investigating the death are allowed to attend the autopsy. We are notified of the death from law enforcement, and that is when we deploy our medical examiner investigator to the scene. The medical examiner investigator independently collects information from witnesses and also from law enforcement. Occasionally, a witness may involve a family member if they were involved in the circumstances that were led up to death. But once we receive that information, the investigator gets a request from the investigating agency to attend the autopsy, and that information is collected into our database. And it is noted so that the medical examiner, when they're about to are ready to perform the autopsy, they would call those individuals requesting to be present at the autopsy and give them a 2-hour notification. Prior to the autopsy, the body is photographed, and any evidence that is found on top of the body or not within the body is also collected at that time. The medical examiner then proceeds to examine the body, much like you would see at a doctor's office from head to toe, and noting any injuries that were found. And law enforcement or the DA's office or OIG, when present, do not direct any aspect of the examination, and rather the medical examiner is sharing the information that they're discovering on the body, including the extent of the injuries. The medical examiner does not determine the sequence of the event or the position of the decedent or the shooters. That is not in our area of expertise. At the conclusion of the autopsy, a report is completed by the medical examiner, which may take up to a week to complete. However, the report is not ready for release until all aspects are completed for our investigation, which includes toxicology specimens. And the results of the toxicology can provide information that's pertinent to the circumstances surrounding death. And toxicology has been taking currently up to 4 to 6 months to come back. And so there is a delay there. However, the information discovered at the examination within the autopsy report is completed prior to that. And after the results come back, there is nothing that changes for the autopsy report, other than the toxicology report is now included within the report. And this is the sort of the standard procedure that we are involved with the officer-involved shootings. We welcome whoever is directly involved with the investigation of the death to attend the autopsy, and these are discovered at request, and these are not invitations that are chosen, but rather requests that are received by the investigating agency, which are honored, and they are invited at the time that the autopsy occurs. So I look forward to having this be part of this panel. I have discussions about this process, and again, thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to thank all the speakers here for providing the information about investigations of fatal officer shootings. Even with all the well-intentioned departments collaborating on this effort, there are still gaps that allow for issues or lack of transparency in the system. Our conversation here today is important, and we hope to build partnerships and improve the process for more accountability and transparency. Before we jump into questions from the public, I have just a couple of questions for the panelists. I'll start with you, Mr. Ukpo, and I'm not sure if you are the best person to answer this or maybe one of the other panelists, but what is the process when notifying the next of kin when there has been a deputy involved shooting? I'm aware of instances where oftentimes, unfortunately, family members will find out about a shooting on the news or through social media before they've been contacted. And that's caused a lot of grief for families that are learning through those channels before hearing from a Los Angeles County official. Are you able to kind of touch on that?
Yes, of course. So when an individual is pronounced dead at the scene, it's really important for us to notify the family of the death. And there are many. We have one individual that is identified as the next of kin. So we do not call all family members, but rather the one that has been identified as the next of kin to advise them of the death. Until we have the decedent identified and the next of kin notified, we do not release that information publicly to the media, who often call our office, but we do not release that information until the next of kin is notified. If there are circumstances where this has occurred, I am not aware of any that have happened of recent or in the history of since I've been here, but if they do, we would like to address that concern and make sure that the next of kin is notified prior to any release of public information.
Thank you, sir. Diana, this question will be for you. I know you were talking about the rollout teams when they come out for office or deputy involved shootings. What about situations where there may have been a death from interaction with a deputy that was not a shooting? So maybe a death that results from taser or from other uses of force that do not involve handguns.
That is what we would consider an in custody death situation. So we would roll out to that. So when someone is, for instance, tased while in custody or in the process of getting arrested, presumably that would be considered an incident that we would be advised of and would roll out to.
And so in custody doesn't necessarily mean that it's a death that happens only like in a jail cell or jail facility.
Correct.
And then Dara, I'll ask the next one for you. You were talking about the officers or the deputies being interviewed. How does it, can you explain to the public how it works when deputies will invoke their Fifth Amendment rights early on in the deputy involved shooting investigation?
At that point, until the district attorney's office issues a decision, the sheriff's department is criminal team. The homicide bureau is not able to ask them any more questions. It essentially at that point in time, you know, they're a suspect in a criminal investigation. However, you know, the homicide bureau investigates it even if there's no apparent wrongdoing on the face of it, right? So, and these are really sensitive words to use in this context, right? Because obviously police officers don't like to think of themselves as suspects, but, you know, and I don't want to diminish the fact that in fact it is a criminal investigation and they are suspects, so they do have that right. And obviously, you know, there's bereaved families who, you know, are, you know, from their perception, this was not justified. And so oftentimes there's a district attorney decision where there's a finding that it was, from the family's perception, justified. So I'm trying to be sensitive in my terminology here, but nevertheless, in the context of the Homicide Bureau's criminal investigation, anyone who fired a weapon is a suspect, and there's possibly other suspects as well. And so they do have the same Fifth Amendment rights that any other suspect would have, not to speak to the criminal investigators. There's a difference when it comes to the administrative investigation, and this actually applies to, you know, all county employees. We must give a statement in essentially an internal investigation. However, that statement cannot be used in the criminal investigation because it's compelled. So essentially it's not a voluntary statement. And so therefore the courts should exclude it based on case law and constitutional principles evolving from the Fifth Amendment.
Thank you for
Does
that.
that
And
answer your
Patricia,
question?
yes, it does. I appreciate that. Patricia, my last question is for you. Does the district attorney's office, when conducting these investigations, do they consider if the involved deputies have been engaged in other uses of force prior to this shooting?
I think that'll be better answered by the DA's office.
Okay, I'll switch it over to you, Diana.
Thank you. They didn't used to on a regular basis, but since in this administration, I can tell you that almost in most of these cases, unless it's a very clear-cut case, we do ask for the 832.7 package, which is their personnel file, which would include prior uses of force and any administrative investigations. In addition, we also have our own discovery compliance system, which we also consult to see if the officer has had any issues, or the officers have had any prior force issues or dishonesty issues in their background, and that is something that we do look at.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of the questions and answers, so I'm going to open it up to the public now. So, Jennifer, can you check to see if there are any community questions for the panel, please?
Sure, yes, and we do have some folks who have already raised their hand. So as a reminder, if you're logged into WebEx to ask a question, please raise your hand. If you have called in, you can press *3 to get in queue to be unmuted. I will unmute you when it's your turn so that you can ask your question. And if your question is for a specific panelist, please feel free to state that. To ask a question, you must be logged into WebEx or phoned into the meeting. If you're commenting on the Facebook Live video, your question may be read by the host. And again, this is not to request information on specific cases, but our panelists are here to talk about the process of investigation. So just keep that in mind. And we won't be doing a timer because this is focused towards questions, not towards public comment. But before we begin, we will have a quick announcement in Spanish. Eric, can you go ahead?
Hola y buen día. Si ha iniciado la conferencia por WebEx y gustaría hacer una pregunta, por favor haga clic en la imagen de la mano y alguien le ayudará. Si está escuchando la conferencia por teléfono y quiere hacer una pregunta, por favor presione estrella 3 y alguien le ayudará cuando sea su turno. Si está viendo la conferencia en vivo por Facebook y ha escrito un comentario o pregunta, la anfitriona lo va a leer al grupo. Por fin, si su pregunta es para un panelista específico, por favor, indique eso al comienzo de su pregunta. Gracias.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Eric. And we'll begin with Irma Cooper. Irma, you're unmuted. Please go ahead with your question.
Good morning. I want to thank all the panelists. Your presentations were excellent, and I've learned a little bit more about the process. But my first question is for Mrs. Thomas. You mentioned that the homicide report is posted to the police website, but I'm not clear how much of that information is posted.
So on our LASD website, under transparency, we post a summary of the facts related to the incident and a subsequent critical incident video. Once the DA's office renders a letter of opinion, they'll post that on their website.
Okay, thank you. The second part of that question is when you talked about the obstacles, I understand your equipment being old, like not enough, laptops, hotspots to do reports, right on site so that you can remember. But have those requests been submitted to the budget to request that needed equipment?
Yes, they have. Thank you.
All right. And then my other question is for Dr. Ukpo. I noticed you said you give people a 2-hour advance notice. Living in the Los Angeles area, to travel from home to just about anywhere in LA is going to take you an hour or so. And I know you're new to the position. So are you considering any changes in your policy on how the time limit a person have to get to one of your examinations? Because if a family member wanted to be there, it appears to me, and I could be wrong, that 2-hour window would be very hard to make.
Thank you for your question. The 2-hour notification comes by the request from law enforcement. We don't decide the time that they're given. Sometimes they ask for additional time, so we don't establish the time. That it's a request that we honor, and we find that they are able to make it to attend the autopsy well within that time frame, and especially because of living in Los Angeles, or the person may be living in another county. If they have any issues, it's communicated to us at the time that they may need additional, but we don't experience that. Now, regarding family being present at the autopsy, they would not be allowed to be to view the autopsy, because it's only individuals directly involved with the investigation that are allowed to observe the autopsy, and that's by law.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the toxicology report can take 4 to 6 months. Is that just the company you're using, or have you looked at other companies that probably could do that a little sooner than 6 months?
We are experiencing a sustained caseload increase since the pandemic, and as a result, we have a backlog. And so our toxicologists have to, with the same amount of staff, do this, handle the increased number of cases. And so we are looking to the budget to ask for additional positions to reduce that time. Our goal is 2 months, 2 to 3 months is our goal, and we are working towards that.
Thank you.
Thank you
That's
for
all.
that, Irma. Thank you. And next we'll go to Ron Dowell. Ron, you've been sent a request to unmute. If you can acknowledge the request, your button will turn green. Ron Dowell. Okay, you're unmuted. Please go ahead, Ron,
Okay.
with your question.
Can you hear me?
We do.
Okay, Ron Dowell, I'm with the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice, Southwest Region, Compton chapter. And I've actually posted several questions in the chat. And I hope to get a response to all of them. But starting off, I'll say that I'm unclear on the purpose of the DA visit to shooting scenes, since they are willing to wait 6 months to 2 years for a law enforcement report. My question is, why can't the DA release some baseline data publicly, such as like the internal briefings that they do? I mean, there is nothing coming out of the DA. For example, the decedent or injured person's name, age, minimal demographic information, and time and location, and the shooter's identity. So I'll stop right there and get an answer before I ask the next question. I have several more. And I actually hope that these questions can be made public. I see that they go directly to you all, but
Yeah, so I just want
public
to
members.
interject really quick, Ron. So the questions that you sent via chat, the panelists cannot see them right now, only the host can. So when you ask your questions, please keep that in mind. And for anyone who wants to submit anything for the public record, please just email them to cocnotify@coc.lacounty.gov, and we'll go ahead and make that available to the public. So again, Ron, if you could wrap up with your question, I think it was for Diana, that last one, right?
Yes.
Right, it's essentially for, right, you're asking me the question, but it's really more of an appropriate question for the Sheriff's Department. By law, they can release that information immediately thereafter, but also by law, if there are any concerns regarding the officer's safety, they can withhold that information, and they are in the best position to make that determination. I know that the LAPD does post that information within a relatively short period of time. But I'm not familiar with LASD's current procedures on that front. So perhaps LASD might be able to answer that question better.
Sure, thank you, Dana. To answer your question, when we post, once again, mentioning our transparency page, there's a summary of the facts. And once a threat assessment has been conducted on the deputies by our Fraud and Cybercrime Bureau, their names are also included in that. And we also post the critical incident video on that transparency website. And regarding I think there was a question about next of kin, notifications or communication. Homicide Bureau, the coroner's office, and later on the DA's office all have communication with them. That's my understanding.
The question was, why not the DA? Can they not make public their internal briefings? But I understand she's saying that would be something, I guess, the sheriff would do, but you do collect information. You do show up at the scenes, as does the coroner and the OIG. You all show up there, but we never see any results of what you see or why you really even show up there. Really, so my question is, why even go if we never going to see any benefit from you showing up there? But
if I could interject, we actually in our quarterly report summarize all deputy involved shootings for the quarter that we're reporting on. So there's a slight delay in that report going out, but we do summarize the deputy involved shootings. We do not use the names of the deputies because, as Ms. Teran mentioned, that's not our purview to do that. The Sheriff's Department should be doing that. as required by law. But we do summarize all deputy involved shootings, including whether it's a fatality. So in other words, the outcome and the general facts as we've learned from the rolling out and the critical incident review.
Okay, so you're saying that's part of your quarterly report that's posted where on your website? Is that what
It
you're
is
saying?
posted on our website. So it's the quarterly report, but it's reform and oversight efforts, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And if you go to our website, oig.lacounty.gov, the most recent reports will come up. So the most recent quarterly report with that information will come up. But if you click through and view more reports and then click on the Sheriff's Department, there's actually a place where you can see all of our quarterly reports by year.
Okay, I will definitely do that. And another question for you, OIG, is that why not advocate for NEBRIS, the Natural Incident Based Reporting Information System by the federal government that they do now require? We as the public has to rely on the old antiquated old data, really, and this NEBRIS system seems to provide more information. And what's public now is just pretty much useless, really. Because we're really interested, particularly here in Compton, we're interested in knowing a lot more information. So I'm wondering why the OIG does not advocate for NEBRIS.
I have to say I'm not familiar with that system, but it gets back to the one information you can make public. There may be systems that facilitate making it public more easily, but I don't know that the system that you use necessarily affects the information that you put out there, right? So because there's time elements, and the law requires the Sheriff's Department to provide information within a certain amount of time. And so I think that the timing element is really what is the slowdown in the information getting out there as opposed to a particular system.
Okay, so you're suggesting that they may already collect it and just not put it all out there. I'm not sure that they do collect it, but it might be advantageous to take a look at it because it is a federal requirement. It's been required now for 2 or 3 years. It's just that the sheriff is not doing it, or does not appear to be doing it. It's
Right.
called NEBRIS.
Okay, yeah, somebody actually is texting me from the office about what the system is, and I can certainly look at that. But like I said, that in all likelihood, the limiting factor is what information the Sheriff's Department is willing to put out. But I'm happy to look at that system and see if that would somehow facilitate more information getting out in a quicker fashion.
Okay, and on that information point, is there a valid reason why the Sheriff's Department employee identities, the ones who work under the Compton contract, are not made public?
And I just want to reiterate, Ron, that the folks who are on the panel today are here to talk about the investigations related to fatal officer shooting. So some of the questions that you're asking may need to be emailed to the commission, and then we'll do what we can to reach out to the correct spokespeople. So did you have any other questions related to the investigations?
Yeah, that question is related to investigation. There are shootings, there are people being shot, people that have been killed. We don't know the identities of who the shooters were.
Okay, so maybe someone from the LASD, Patricia, perhaps you can talk about the process of releasing names of folks who are involved in shootings. Does that satisfy your question, Ron?
Yeah, we'd like to know who the shooters are. This is why we're asking for all folks that work under that contract to disclose who they are if they're working in a city. If we know that up front, we could track it ourselves.
Okay, let's see if Patricia has a response related to that.
Hi, sir. I thought I answered this. So if you go onto our department website, lasd.org, and you go under transparency, we list summaries of deputy involved shootings. And we post the facts. After a threat assessment is conducted, then we posted involved deputies' names, unless there's a reason not to, such as that's revealed during the threat assessment.
Okay.
And that's public information.
I will definitely
Patricia,
check
can you
that.
just note on when your team started posting this information? Because I know Ron's gone back many years with his research.
I don't have that information, I'm sorry, but recently we've been trying to get them out within 30 days.
Okay.
Okay, so okay, Patricia, so do you see a reason why we cannot know all of the employee names who work in the Compton station?
So if you're talking directly about Compton Station, sir, I recommend you speak out to Compton Station directly, but I can also submit that to the department for follow-up.
Yeah, we have to the station and to the city too, asking through PRI requests for that information.
Okay, thank you very much, Ron. We're going to go to the next person who's in line to ask questions. And that's a call-in user whose phone number begins with 323. A request has been sent for you to unmute. If you can just acknowledge that request, I believe you have to press *6.
Good
Okay,
morning.
you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Byron, SD2 resident, and someone that's lived in LA County for the last 25 years, surviving decriminalization and surveillance from the Sheriff's Department. My question is, in this investigation, would there be like gang enhancements? Again, I'm not for upholding or increasing any of our carceral or punitive systems, but the way that the Sheriff's Department, the DA's Department have used these rights towards our communities. So when it comes to the gangs, active gangs for these officers within your department, are they going to be getting gang enhancement? And would that modify or update the investigation, or like the resources being allotted to it? So Patricia or anyone from the district attorney's office.
Okay, I guess the short answer to that is probably no. Gang affiliation into these deputy gangs is something that we are looking into. However, as a general rule, our policy is absent some sort of exceptional circumstances, we are not filing gang enhancements on anyone, really, for the most part in Los Angeles County. But everything is a case-by-case basis. I guess in an appropriate case, we might file something, but I would say probably not. But it is something that we do take into consideration with respect to motive, with respect to honesty, with respect to, in addition with, the actual facts that we have before us in the investigation.
Awesome, thank you for that. And Byron, did you have any additional questions?
No, I think that was it for now. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move to Ellie. Ellie, a request has been sent for you to unmute. Okay, go ahead.
Ellie, I'm actually an impacted family member, and I had two questions, one for the medical examiner's office and one for Patricia. And the first one for the medical examiner is, when conducting autopsy reports of a fatal use of force, does the medical examiner indicate on the autopsy report or on any reporting which agency was responsible for the killing? And do they also keep track of the names of the officers or deputy involved in those shootings or killings?
Yes, so regarding information that is in our reports, we have documentation of the investigating agency that has come to witness the autopsy, and that's who we will note in our report of who was present at the autopsy.
But not the agency that was responsible for the shooting, correct? So from my understanding, if it was a smaller police department, but the investigating agency is the sheriffs, you would indicate the sheriffs, but not the agency who actually was responsible for the shooting?
So that's part of the investigator's narrative, where they talk about the circumstances. And so within those circumstances, you would see the agency that was responding and involved with the death.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is for Patricia, because I did notice that when the DA report comes out for these shootings, they do not redact the names of or serial numbers for the officers or deputy involved, But even in the most recent cases, the sheriffs do redact that information. And in the transparency website that you noted, they in that summary or the data that they publish, they do also publish the DA reports. But on the sheriff's publishing of the DA reports, the names are redacted, even when they are not undercover, or so I just wanted to know why that is, when the DA is publishing those same reports and they are not redacting the names of the office of the deputies involved.
The summaries I've seen the deputies' names listed, and once the DA posts their letter of opinion, we also attach a link to that letter of opinion, which has a name. So we're not trying to withhold any information.
No, not on the summary reports. In the ones that I have seen, there's there's a summary, and there's also in that summary, it's sometimes the DA report is linked onto that, but there's redactions on that, not on the summary report, but on the DA report. So from what I'm seeing is the DA is publishing the reports and they're not redacting any information, but on that same DA report that the sheriff is publishing under the transparency and the transparency website, they are redacting the names.
Okay, my understanding is that we attach a link directly to the DA's office, not a different version of a redacted report.
No, I have seen it's a PDF, not a link.
So Ellie, thank you for that. If you would like to email the commission, you can email us with, it sounds like this is a specific situation. You can send us the link and the situation that you're talking about, and then we can reach out to the panelists and try to get an answer back for you on that.
Okay.
Did you have any other questions about the general process of investigation?
Nope, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And next we'll move to Tamra. A request has been sent for you to unmute.
Yes,
Okay.
can you hear me?
We do, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, this, I'm just gonna say these congruently. It was a lot to unpack in all the presentations. So, where's the real accountability? Y'all are talking about transparency, but y'all are blocking the OIG from interviewing deputy gangs. So a question, if deputies make statements, they can't be used in the investigation. If evidence is collected, if the evidence is not collected, it can be lost. Also, a statement was made unaltered as much as possible. So like these statements and these actions by your department aren't real transparency. So where's the real accountability? Why are you all blocking the OIG from interviewing deputy gangs and then allowing them to plead the fifth? And then you're saying these statements can't be used in the investigation. If they're not collecting the evidence properly, it can be lost. And some of it needs to be unaltered. A statement was made as much as possible. So this leaves room for a lot of issues. In addition, the medical examiner, who are these stakeholders? And why aren't the families allowed? Because the problem is the coroners are complicit in all this. And I'll give you an example. John Horton was murdered by the 3000 boys, and his death was ruled as suicide, then later deferred because he was beaten so badly.
And so Tamra, I'm sorry, I just want to interject. It sounds like you've already asked a couple of questions, and I want to make sure that if the panelists have answers that they can interject. So
Okay.
If you could just, as you wrap up, just restate what your question is.
Well, there's various questions within what I just stated. So where's the real accountability and transparency, based on these investigations? Because it seems like everybody involved here, not even seems, everybody involved here is complicit in covering up these murders and getting any real accountability. So where's the real accountability and transparency? And I also think it's really inappropriate for y'all to come on here and make these presentations and ask for additional money and resources when there's family members on here grieving and trying to get real questions answered about their loved ones killed, and y'all covering up these investigations.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you very
So
much. So
I
go
can
ahead.
answer a couple of things about this. So first of all, I just want to say that with regard to the deputy gang investigation by the Office of Inspector General, the unions were the ones who filed the lawsuit in the court, and Sheriff Luna actually did send out a directive that, pursuant to county policy, that any deputies that were sent a letter should cooperate with the Office of Inspector General. And once again, if an individual believes that they have a valid right under the Fifth Amendment, they can't be compelled to testify, because the Fifth Amendment states that probably says no man, but no person can be forced to be a witness against themselves. And so there are certain constitutional principles that apply in every case, even when a police officer is potentially a suspect. There's a lot of nuances in the deputy gang investigation. There is no intention for the Office of Inspector General is not the employee of these individuals, and the Office of Inspector General cannot impose any discipline. So I don't want to get into a detailed analysis of the case. They're actually in court right now on an order to show cause with regard to whether or not we should be able to move forward with the next step. But I just did want to correct that. It is the unions who filed the lawsuit to stop the deputy gang investigation. Now, that being said, the Sheriff's Department could on its own, and should on its own, be conducting these investigations, because they sit in a better position where the case law with regard to their investigations is quite clear, whereas with regard to the Office of Inspector General, we're sort of in a new territory. My opinion is that we're not really in a new territory, and that this should be very simple, and that the Office of Inspector General should be able to go forward. But as I said, that's currently tied up in the courts, and we're hoping for a favorable ruling later today. I don't know that the judge will rule today. He may defer that ruling, but they are currently in court right now. So I think those are mostly the questions that I can answer with regard to the position that the deputies sit in and the Fifth Amendment, and with regard to the status of the OIG's gang investigation, and the fact that the Sheriff's Department could in fact be conducting this investigation, and it would be more expedient for them to do so.
Thank you for that, Dara. And Dr. Ukpo, I just want to give you a chance to respond. It seems like there were some questions asked around the independence of the medical examiner's office and how it's separate from LASD. So if you'd like to speak a little bit about that. I know I saw some things like that related in the news. And then also how you maintain your transparency related to the autopsies and LASD being at autopsies where there are fatal officer shootings related to LASD employees.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for that opportunity. The medical examiner's office is an independent agency that conducts its own investigation around the circumstances surrounding the death. However, as medical examiners, we do not have the ability to determine a sequence of events, but rather look at a body at a snapshot in time and see what happened to them and make a conclusion based off of the medical findings. And unlike what is perhaps perceived, is that we determine the circumstances and recreate scenes and events just by the examination alone, which is not what the medical examiner does, but rather inquires about the circumstances surrounding the death to inform the manner of death. And regarding transparency, the business of the medical examiner is of public record. The cause and manner of death is available on our website for those to look up. And also the autopsy report is also of public record. And so any conclusions that we made can be found within that report if requested. And that is how we maintain our transparency in the work that we do by making the work of the medical examiner of public record.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ukpo. And Diana, I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about how you work with LASD or supervise, however you want to say it, with the investigations. There's a couple of questions online on Facebook that kind of relate to where Tamara was headed about cooperation between the agencies. So if you could just talk a little bit about your independence at the DA and how you do the investigation without relying solely on the Sheriff's Department, if that's the case. Oh, and I believe you're muted.
Sorry about that. I will say that the cooperation and collaboration with the Sheriff Department in general has greatly increased under Sheriff Luna. We are now, I believe, as the Lieutenant mentioned, we're now going to have quarterly meetings with our head of JCID and our investigators and command staff out of the Homicide Bureau on officer-involved shootings to try to move them along faster. It's been a problem for everyone that these cases take a long time. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but without making excuses, we recognize it's an issue and we're trying to address it. I also personally have meetings with the Chief of Professional Standards and some of her personnel once a month on different issues that come up on any kind of criminal investigations, but also sometimes officer-involved shootings. As far as, you know, I've been advised, we have not run into any issues where we ask the Sheriff Department to conduct additional investigation or follow-up. They're generally very cooperative in that way. I do want to add that because we review officer-involved shooting cases throughout the county, not just the Sheriff's Department provides the deputies who are involved in these, for the most part, provide voluntary statements. There are many agencies where they don't provide voluntary statements throughout the county, and that does make it a little bit more difficult for us sometimes to render our final opinions. So I will say that that is a benefit. As far as the quality of the investigations, it's been my experience that they range from excellent to, you know, some that have some issues. And but overall, I think the relationship is good, especially now. And there's a lot of dialogue going on about how we can work better together on these cases.
Thank you for that, Diane. And we do have two more community questions. Rosemarie Almo, I sent you a request to unmute, and then after Rosemarie, we'll take Isaac Asbury. So Rosemarie, on your device, if you can just acknowledge the unmute request. I'm not seeing any action on the back end, Rosemarie. So if you send a chat, we can see if we can get you unmuted. We'll move on to Isaac Asbury. Isaac, if you can acknowledge the unmute request. Okay, I'm not seeing where either of you are allowing the unmute, but if you can send me a chat, we can try to work it out. In the meantime, for Dr. Ukpo, we have something in the chat. If you can just, again, explain why families are not allowed in the autopsy, that would be helpful for the attendees.
Yeah, so families are not allowed in the autopsy because it's at the discretion of the medical examiner of who will attend, and by law, the person who attends needs to be directly involved with the investigation of the case.
Got it. That sounds good. Well, I believe that since Rosemary and Isaac, Isaac, you are do the same thing you just did again. Sorry, everyone, for the technical issues. Okay, Isaac, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the delay. My question is to the Sheriff Department. Operation Safe Street deputies, officer involved shootings. We noticed that their names in the last, I don't know how many, 20 years, their names are never provided to the public. Now, we have every name of every officer in the past 23 years, but we're missing almost 100 to 150 names of these Operation Safe Street. We put in public requests under Sheriff Baca, Sheriff McDonald, Sheriff Villanueva, and Sheriff Luna, and we yet to receive answers. I don't think it's fair to the community if the citizens don't know who these deputies are, and I'm not a lawyer, but if you don't even know the names of the deputy who shot your loved ones, how do you proceed? That is my question. So my third question is, I don't see the FBI in none of these civil rights officer involved shootings. I don't even, do you even request the FBI to be involved in some of these investigations? That's all I have.
Okay, Isaac, for the first part of your question regarding OSS and the deputies' names, perhaps there's a specific case why the names were not released, or they worked in an undercover capacity. Regarding the second question, if FBI is involved, normally not, but every case is independent of each. And we also have the California State Department of Justice who are involved when an unarmed civilian is killed.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh, go ahead, please.
I can add that when we release our officer involved shooting reports, we do not sanitize the information that someone was from a particular unit. That's usually part of the memo that we post on our website. And with respect to the FBI, I think, there's a collaboration. Sometimes they'll reach out to us or vice versa to see if they're interested, but they have discretion to intervene or to request to intervene on any case, as well as the Attorney General. And one last thing I did want to mention, I know that it's always very, very difficult for families when we make a decision and that decision it results in no prosecution. The families can always reach out to the Attorney General to have them review our investigation and render their own independent opinion. So that is an option to the families as well.
Thank you for that, Diana. And just entertaining one last question that was sent via Facebook, Dr. Ukpo. I know we've had a lot of questions about autopsies. This one is, can an attorney for the family be allowed in an autopsy? And that's going to be the last question that we'll take today.
An attorney that is brought on by the family is not directly involved in the investigation of the case, so would not fall under that criteria to be allowed to witness the autopsy.
Thank you very much for that answer. And Vice Chair Hicks, that does conclude all the community questions at this time. If you did have additional questions for the community, please feel free to email them to us. So Vice Chair Hicks, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your thoughts, and to the community members for tuning in to this very important conversation hosted by the Civilian Oversight Commission. We hope that you can join us at the upcoming commission meeting at St. Anne's, which is set for July 20th at 9 a.m. The next community meeting will be in Pico Rivera at the Probation Training Center, Saturday, July 15th, and that's at 10 a.m. And just a reminder, the commission is also taking applications for the community appointed volunteer commissioner position. If you have any interest in this, please reach out to learn more. Visit our website at coc.lacounty.gov. That's coc.lacounty.gov for more information and to RSVP for the events. I want to thank everyone again and have a great and blessed day. This concludes our conference.